Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's fireside chat on what's real and what's hype, demystifying AI threats and vulnerabilities for the enterprise. My name is Rich Isenberg, and I'm happy to be the host for this session. I'm currently a partner at McKinsey and Company, where I help organizations implement security strategies and establish digital resilience. In my previous life, I was the Chief Information Security Officer at SunTrust Bank, now Truist, and have held various other leadership positions within the financial services sector at companies such as Capital One and Fiserv. I'm excited to be here today with Caleb Sima. Caleb, do you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, Rich, thanks. I'm Caleb Sima. I've been around for quite some time, in the early 90s, so I've been doing security for a long time. I think I'm an old man. Most of my career has been building cybersecurity startup companies. And then I did this unusual pivot where, Rich, you and I met at Capital One, and then CISO Databricks, and then Robinhood. And then just most recently, I went back to being a entrepreneur and helping go create more cybersecurity companies.
Fantastic. And I do recall that one of your reasons for the pivot was to get a better understanding of what the real problems were that enterprises needed solving so that you could think about that from a distant lens with your entrepreneurial hat that you put on.
That's right. And that is an entire podcast in and of itself. So I could talk about that for hours. Uh, so AI, though, which also I have been talking a lot about, oddly enough, because there's an interesting thing where I left Robinhood to go focus on AI because, I think it was Chat GPT 3 had just come out, 3.5, and it was crazy. And I wanted to learn more. And so I really dedicated my time to learning everything I could about the fundamentals around it and decided to just post everything I could learn on LinkedIn so that other people could sort of take advantage of that. And all of a sudden, somehow I became an AI expert in security, and and therefore have continued to study and do passions, and then give as much random advice as I can on this topic, which thinking of around both hype and reality. It's interesting because I feel like I've been talking about the same thing for a year, and yet people are still kind of catching up. So it feels like old hat to me, but hopefully new to everybody else.
I would advise people to look up some of those blog posts. I read some. I found them very informative. I think in the demystification category, your ability to liken them to SQL injection and old school application vulnerabilities helped frame a lot of folks' minds as how to think about this without getting overwhelmed.
Yeah.
We know there's just a ton of hype around AI and responsible usage and the different vulnerabilities and attacks. Can you give us some examples of how do you separate fact from fiction? What are some of the common misconceptions about AI threats that people frequently encounter, and why are they misleading?
One of the first, I'll start with maybe a more first principles approach that hopefully I can teach the audience how to do this for themselves, as opposed to relying on so-called experts like me. But one of the key things that I did is really try to understand what an LLM is at its fundamentals. I really went as low level as I could. There are even YouTube videos where you can write this little C program that will teach you exactly what an LLM does and how it works. And there's a lot of tutorials and information around just what is it? How does it work? Why does it work this way? Really understanding the principles. And once you know those foundational blocks, then it becomes pretty easy to kind of differentiate between fact and fiction, right? Because there's a lot of hype. And when there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of bullshit that gets thrown around. And in fact, one of the things that really started me a little bit on some of my tantrum, I would call it, around the FUD that we as a security industry brought around AI was like data leakage. Is a good example is, oh, if you upload your data, your private data into OpenAI or Anthropic, then an attacker can retrieve that data through the LLM and access it. And so everybody across the board was like, stop, block all ChatGPT, all OpenAI, do not send your data. Um, and then when you understand the fundamentals, you start realizing and say, hey, that's not the problem. It's actually extraordinarily difficult for some attacker to retrieve PII out of an AI model. It's way more likely that an attacker breaks into OpenAI and grabs the proxy logs or the firewall logs and gets your data than it is them extracting it from an LLM, which then shifts that fear, right? Because the fear is like, oh, it's new tech, can't do anything about it. Like, we can't go send data, to a well-known problem, which ultimately it's a third-party risk problem. It's, do you trust OpenAI? Do you trust Anthropic? It's not about the tech or the AI model itself. And so I think, like, when you look at the lineage of saying, oh, understand the basics, understand the fundamentals, that helps you differentiate between the fear and where you should be afraid versus where you shouldn't. And for me, that really helped me understand a lot of the practical things that you should be afraid of versus, I think, the things that are mostly hype. And so that, one of those things, by the way, is what helped me start saying, well, hey, how do we help other CISOs, other security teams know that difference? I want practical security recommendations. I don't want, oh, AI is going to kill humanity, AI is going to kill the nation. I want AI security for the enterprise, practical, non-FUD. And that is the reason why CSA's AI Safety Alliance got created, is Jim and I got together and said, I want to build practical things that's, without the hype, without the FUD, to kind of come to this.
So as you think through that and you get down to the next level, you've separated the signal from the noise, right? Assume you've got the hype to the side and people are focused on real threats. What are the practical steps an enterprise can take for protections? I think there's a lot of hype around you need a whole new set of tools, and there's an endless supply of vendors around AI firewall, PII scrubber that goes in the pipeline. How
Yeah.
much do you need to investigate that to focus on the real threats versus getting the fundamentals right about data permissions and data security? So how would an enterprise CISO think about the controls they need to put in place to be responsible?
Well, I'll point to CSA and say we've released a phenomenal amount of documents and guidelines on how to do real practical things. But, fundamentally, 95% of what it takes to secure an AI model is all the same stuff that everyone has been doing every single. This is permissions. This is securing infrastructure, securing data, securing privacy, all of these things, the data pipeline to both get data, build models, run models. This is all the same stuff that we deal with every day. The actual 5%, which is the model itself, security issues, are the more unique things that people really have to learn. But Rich, I'd love to, this is a fireside chat. I would love to hear from you. You go and you talk to a lot of companies and deal with them. Like, what are you hearing? What are the kinds of things you think about AI practicality, and what are people scared of? What's working, what's not?
Great question. I think it's very much what you started with, of separating fact from fiction. I think there's a lot of fear out there, and there's a lot of frustration from some enterprise business use cases that want to very aggressively go to market with things they think will resonate and help their customers, that have an generative AI bend to it. Whether they're building their own models, whether they're using it for synthesis or to make call center agents better. And I think what they're finding is there's such a lack of knowledge and understanding on the risk and security side that they put the stop sign up. And they're really looking for, what is the analytical framework we can really use to factually risk assess the real threats, be very reasonable about the controls that are in place, to your earlier point, a lot of which they already have, and
Mhm.
allow the businesses to actually go after the value in a responsible way. I feel like the stop signs are up because there is no firm understanding of what the real threats are. and people start to over rotate on things they read on CNN, on Twitter, what their favorite vendor who's got a closed LLM has told them to stay away from open LLMs. And there
Right.
just isn't enough learning and information out there. I think that's thing one of two. The second is people are very afraid of, how are people that are trying to attack us using generative AI? And what are the defensive controls we need to think through, whether it's better voice detection controls in call centers, whether it's more intelligent authentication systems. And I think those two dimensions have been very much a struggle for most enterprise security departments to figure out the real answers.
Yeah, it's a good point on separating the two. There really is this, how do I secure AI? And then how is security going to change because attackers have AI? And these are these are very, very different pillars that you've got to be able to worry about. I find that, one of the things that I just did last week, I don't know when this thing we just came out of CSA, a whole bunch of us in CSA got together and we did basically 3 days of all day sitting down of coming up with what is the AI control matrix for what is really the actual controls for the legitimate threats, high priority versus low priority. And the way we modeled it is after obviously CSA's very famous cloud control matrix, right? And we ended up walking away with, it's oddly enough, only 27, I believe it's 27. We're not done yet. We're only in version 1, but 27 new controls. That's it. It's not like hundreds of new controls. When you actually look at the threats from a secure AI perspective, a large majority are just standard things that exist in cloud and in infrastructure in general, with only 27 really new ones that we could point out that are very model specific. And so that just shows you that as we produce this thing, hopefully that'll give some of these enterprises something they can look at and say, okay, this is really what we need to do in order to make this work.
And that's a
What
reminder for everybody listening to go check out that matrix. I think much like the early days of the cloud control question, which was very much the same, is what controls do you need? Is it all different? CSA came out with a framework as a way to think about the cloud specific controls that helped everybody cut through the noise and really focus on what mattered.
Yep. So same thing. That's what, and AI is an exact copy, I believe. Okay. So where do you want to go, Rich? What's a direction that's more interesting for you?
So here's a question. As you put your entrepreneurial hat back on, and now you've spent enough time with CSA, you've seen the enterprise side, we've got, I feel like you cannot market a security product these days without the words generative AI in it. A lot of it seems hype. We've seen some interesting usefulness in the security operations space. But if you think about the niche where a product or some industry thinking, where's the opportunity that can really help folks accelerate and feel better if they don't have an endless supply of engineering talent at a company? Like, what's the missing component that you think the market and the vendors are going to step in to fill?
I gave this presentation, which was this thing around how is AI going to help solve the CISO's next top problems. And here's again to what you had brought up before. There's a lot of power in how AI can help security and a lot of power how AI can help attackers. How AI can help security. Here's the thing that, when you look at all these products, so we buy all of these products, all these vendors, and they all do these specific things, but not quite at the level that you want them to. Like, I'll give you a great example. Um, you see, we talked about sort of the SOC space, and that's a space you're really familiar with. Like, okay, I buy this SIM, right? And I get these alerts that pop up and say, oh, you have a network connection going outbound to stripe.com. And you're like, great. Is that bad? Is that good? What do I do with this? Is this an example of a bad detection? Like, what is like, or a root login to a system? You're like, well, that could be bad, that could be good. And so the problem isn't that actually products are they're good at what they're supposed to do. But what's been missing, I think, is there's sort of these three things I put in there. I put in context, and I put coverage, and I put communication. So let's take the SOC example. When you think about the SOC and you think about the problems, why don't we see attackers today? Number one, it's about coverage, right? When you look at where you have your watchers, across your enterprise, you're missing huge gaps across a lot of these areas. And so, like, this is a big problem when it comes to, well, why am I missing all these things? Well, if you could have, let's say, 2,000 junior security engineers who all they do is just look at logs and really look for things that are security related and say, oh, this looks important, or look at all the systems and look for those things. AI is able to bring coverage. You could actually treat it this exact same way. I can get coverage. It can go out and look at all of the things that it needs. The second, I think, is context. When you get that alert that says, oh, an outbound to stripe.com was made, what you really want to know is, well, what's the context around this? Why are you alerting this? You could say, oh, an outbound call to stripe.com was made, but we analyzed your code repositories and we identified the Stripe libraries just got added in the last build. We also looked at your Jira ticketing system and identified lots of discussion around Stripe being ticketed and adding as our new processing library for this app production system. We also identified Slack communication and emails that discussed from these primary leaders that Stripe.com was an accepted library and communication processor. We also pinged the lead guy of that system and asked him if Stripe.com was an allowed outbound call, and he approved and said yes. So now, when you look at this Stripe.com alert coming up, you have all this context that now allows you to make a better decision, right? It doesn't mean you have to make the decision automatically. It just means, how do I provide the human with higher confidence capability to make the decision for me? And if you do enough of those, obviously in the next couple of years, then maybe it can automatically make that decision for you. So I think those are examples. It's not just about a specific new product that AI will bring. I think it's about its ability to bring better communication, better context, better coverage to the existing solutions and problems we're solving today that we just couldn't. And I think you're going to see a lot of power there.
Yeah, I love the thinking, and I love the distinction between human assisted versus human replacement. I think there was a lot of early hype of you can fire half of your developers, you can get rid of a bunch of security analysts, AI will do it for you. I think the
Yes.
reality is exactly as you described. How do we use this to assist people and amplify the skills of our best people and help the people that aren't our best people make better decisions as if they were? And
Yeah.
let me close with one complicated final question to that. A lot of the success of that and the success of even things as pervasive as Office 365 Copilot, right? They're as good as the corpus of data you feed it to analyze. So all those different sources that you mentioned in your hypothetical use case. But enterprises today are generally very poor at data rights management and data security. And we've
Mm.
seen folks say, okay, well, I'm going to use generative AI, and suddenly people are querying, well, what's the CEO's salary? Where does he live? What was the company's strategy? What company are we going to buy next? And
Yes.
everybody panics and everything gets shut down. How would you advise enterprises to think about the balance between accessibility for the corpus versus data security and the need to segment access?
Well, I think that there are stages to this, right? As there is in everything for an adoption. And the first phase of this is when you look at, let's say, products like Glean or Copilot, who are, integrating data sources across the enterprise and trying to become this search engine. Make use of the existing permissions. Unfortunately, I wish we were better at doing our permissions, and maybe AI can help with that later down the road. But today, we are pretty bucket large, right? We say you are in engineering, you have access to engineering content. You're in sales, you have access to sales. You're in finance, you have access to finance. And right now, LLMs or AI are just saying, well, based on who you are and your role, I will allow you to access the data which you're allowed to access. Now, as AI gets better and as we start becoming more nuanced in the way that we do things, Then it kind of rises up that stack where it's not a data problem. It goes to what I like to say for Sunil Yu's sort of comment is it's a knowledge problem, right? So now it's when you can ask, what is the CEO's salary? And today it'll just be no, denied, right? But if you ask the CEO, if you were someone who was the CEO, you may ask the CEO, he may answer you and goes, oh, well, I'm a public company. My salary is publicly available and it is this amount of money. Right? You can go look. And by the way, I had a CEO tell me this because I asked, actually, it was specifically Ben Horowitz, if you know, he was at HP, and when he was our leader at HP, I asked him what his salary was because I had to put it in a presentation of a hack I did, and he goes, "Yeah, just leave it there." He goes, "I'm fine with that. If you want to make that money, I will gladly give you my job." You know, so there's like, there's like a yeah, there's a sense of saying, well, what is the context? What is the situation? There is nuance in knowledge being passed. And so we haven't gotten there yet, right? But at some point, an LLM or an AI will have to understand the nuance. So it's no longer just, do you have rights or do you not? It will see, how do I translate it for you? And in the right context and the role and what your information you're trying to obtain. So I may give you the salary, I may not. If it's a private company and the CEO is private, I might say, hey, listen, that's a great question. He makes a pretty good amount average what is normal CEOs in our thing gets, right? Like it's a nuanced, knowledged answer. We are not there yet. Rich, I think we have a long way to go. But these are great examples, I think, of good problems that we're going to see. I don't know if we have time. I would have loved to turn the question around and ask you about what you've seen, but let me know. You're sort of the moderator, so you can run
Yeah,
with it.
I think we do want to shift to the Q&A part via chat now. Even though this is pre-recorded, we're going to do live Q&A through the chat. I will say the one final comment of the reason I asked that question is this has been coming up more and more as it's become readily apparent how poor enterprise data security is and how much of security was implemented via obfuscation.
Yep.
Nobody knew where the data was, so they didn't know to go look for it. But when there's someone you can ask, what's been, coming back is, holy cow, we've never paid attention to this properly before. Now we have to go fix this before we can
Yes.
take
Yes.
advantage of the, infinite possibilities around generative AI, which all in all is a good thing to make people focus back on getting data security right, getting access right, so you can solve some of these problems in a way that benefits the organization.
One thing we didn't talk about, but is very relevant to this topic of discussion is data poisoning, which what's very interesting is now that AI is acting on the data at which it consumes from an enterprise and factors that into its answers, data poisoning becomes a really, really fascinating security issue. Where you could say, well, when someone says, what's our CEO like? The answer could be our CEO is an idiot. And and nobody trained that to happen. So who made that happen? So like this will be a really fun security vulnerability that we're gonna start seeing a lot more of.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it fits into an overall risk framework around generative AI where you have to look at accuracy, explainability, bias, security, and figure out how do you measure each and every one of those so that you can add some controls around it. But maybe
Yep.
that'll be the topic for our next fireside chat down the road.
Part two. Yeah, sounds
Part
good.
two to come.